Hey, welcome to Startup Club. You are listening to Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. We do this every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern. And if you're listening to it in podcast, you might not know this, but you can actually join us on Clubhouse in the Startup Club every Friday at 2 o'clock and come on stage because it actually is a live show. And today we will be talking about raising money for small businesses. You might be in the audience right now and you are looking to raise money, or you have raised money and you have a story to share with us. We'd love to have you on stage. Today we're going to be bringing in a legal expert to help talk us through that whole process. It can be daunting, I can tell you that. But before we get started, if I could ask everybody on stage and in the audience, right at the very bottom there, we have the button second from the left is we'd like you to share this on Clubhouse. And what that will do is it'll go out to the people on Clubhouse who are interested in the topic of early stage funding, prep and pitfalls, both the legal and the founders. So we're going to have a discussion here with a newbie. I can see there he is. There's John. John
Hey,
Owens, yep. He's got there's a symbol that goes on, John. I'm just following you now. I'm your third follower. You're new to Clubhouse.
awesome.
Don't
I
worry,
am.
we've had about, you're not alone. We've had a number of authors and even billionaires who've come on this show, and they are new to Clubhouse. So you got what's called your party hat, and
Oh,
we'll try to
nice.
be nice. But I wanted to say that I had a great opportunity to run a cohort at NSU Levan Center and with John Owens, and he took sort of the legal side of raising money, and I took the practical sort of experience side of raising money, and we had a great discussion. So again, if
We
you're in the
did.
audience and you are looking to raise money, or you have a question about raising money, or you've raised money and you have a story to share, we want to hear from you. So please raise your hand. John, welcome to the show. Welcome to Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I look forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. And I liked our dynamic in the cohort where you would say something and I would say something, you would say, well, wait a minute. That's actually, you need to get some paperwork around that. And it's not as easy as it sounds. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
just to kick it off, just to start, just give us a little bit about your background and raising money for a startup. So we're talking about our audience here. We're talking about anyone, from a one-person show to a 100-person company. I think we're all pretty much looking to raise money this year. So if you could just a bit of
Okay.
your background to kick it off.
Definitely, and thanks, Colin. And it's a pleasure to speak with everyone here today. A little bit of background about me. I am an attorney. Don't hold it against me. It's what I do for a living. Been practicing for since 2006, and initially I started out as primarily a capital markets and M&A lawyer, but primarily capital markets, so working with public companies, learning federal securities laws and state blue sky laws, and over time I started doing more and more work with with entrepreneurs and with emerging companies. From a legal perspective, my background as a securities lawyer and capital markets lawyer was a sort of easy transition because it's really sort of the core fundamentals of you know of securities offerings is what happens in VC. And but I just really like the energy around working with entrepreneurs, working with emerging companies, and also working with the people who like investing in them. Diligencing them and finding new investment opportunities. And so, many years later, I find myself in a position where I spend a considerable amount of my working time working on what we would describe as venture capital transactions. And when I'm wearing that hat, certain times I'm representing entrepreneurs and the emerging companies, and other times I'm representing venture capitalists and investment funds and angel investors and family offices when they invest in these transactions. So I sort of see both sides of these deals, and sort of perspectives from founders' perspective as well as investors' perspective. And I like to think that my clients appreciate, that experience and perspective. But that's me in a nutshell.
Well, it's interesting because I've done the both. I've done both as well. I've been
Hmm.
acquired a number of times in my life, my companies, and I have been on the other side acquiring companies. And so it's a different perspective. But learning, if you're like if you're a startup and you're looking to raise money or you're looking to be acquired, it's good to actually have the perspective or the entity or the individuals or the groups that are investing in your company. If you can understand their mentality, you can probably increase your chances of success at that raise. Does that make sense?
Very much, very much. And one of the things that we often tell founders is, you want to get right the things that you can get right. And oftentimes that starts with just traditional due diligence items. I mean, some things you would think are not really debatable or open for discussion, but they actually can end up being some of the biggest hurdles or gating issues to raising money or selling your business, such as who owns your company. And that seems like it would be a very sort of simple and straightforward answer to a question, but that oftentimes is not the case, particularly if it's not documented correctly. And so, from a lawyer's perspective, we're always coaching clients to, ask questions. There's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question, but to ask questions to make certain that everything is, uh, you know, recorded properly and documented properly, because it really does help once investors get under the hood of your company, because there is a playbook, right? Like from a diligence perspective, a legal diligence perspective, there's a playbook. And so often for founders, your business, right? Like if you're selling widgets or you're creating widgets, um, that piece, right? That's the piece you've been doing your whole life or your whole professional life. That's the piece you enjoy doing. There's a lot of energy around whatever it is whatever product or service you're creating and selling. And sort of the last thing that founders want to deal with are, sort of the mundane paperwork that the lawyers or that the accountants are trying to force them to pay attention to. And so, um, that's always a place where we start.
So, diving into this a little bit, but first, I just want to refresh the room for a second. We're speaking with John Owens. He is an attorney who specializes in transactions as well as securities law. John, the law firm Greenberg Turig LLP here in Miami. You're not far from us, John. If you find you want to reach out to John, you could just contact him via LinkedIn or go to his corporate site. Again, John Owens at Greenberg Turig. Like, I'm interested from hearing from you because this is can be very daunting. Like, as a startup, we don't often think, oh my gosh, we're going to go to somebody of your caliber, maybe of your experience. We just might go to, like our, divorce attorney or whoever it is, our friend who is an attorney, because, oh my gosh, we're being very careful about money. But we know we have a
Hmm.
viable business. Like, what is your words of wisdom? Like, what is your advice? Like, really, what should you be doing? And I'd like to hear it from a business owner's point of view And I'd like to hear it from, if you're, starting to raise money or thinking about raising money, like what is your advice so that we don't really screw ourselves up, a few years down the line, or whatever it is.
Right. So from my perspective, one thing I always tell clients is, if you have a serious business and you're growing that business and it's doing well, and at some point you're going to raise money for that business, et cetera, you're going to have to talk to somebody like me, right? It might not be me, but it's going to be somebody like me, somebody who is an attorney who has expertise in, securities offerings, venture capital, corporate compliance. And so the sooner you have those conversations, the better. It's the same way with accounting firms, right? Like the sooner you have these conversations and get some guidance, the better, because inevitably what happens, you know, founders are, like you mentioned, Michelle, they're focused on the bottom line and economics. And for instance, with service providers like lawyers or accounting firms, they're concerned with how much it costs. And I can tell you invariably that it will always cost you at least twice as much, if not more, for somebody like me to come in and redo something that was done incorrectly, than it would be to just do it from scratch. And so, and also it takes twice as much time, or at least twice as much time to redo something that was done incorrectly. And so, there are law firms out there, ours is one, that although we're a very large law firm, we are, used to and, enjoy working with startup companies. There are plenty of companies that I've worked with, from inception, or, from the time it was just an idea in the founder's head and they didn't have any funding yet, because at the very least I can point them in the right direction about things that they should be thinking about, certain documents that they should have, sort of the right way to approach it. And, the reality is, like for instance, forming a company, just a basic company formation, if you're the only owner of a company. Um, these are things that anyone who's attending this room can actually budget out and afford, right? One of the examples I give clients, I say, listen, if you come to my office and we're sitting down talking, and you were to leave my office today, and if you're pulling out of the garage, and let's say you get distracted and you inadvertently hit someone in your car who's, scooting by on one of these scooters that are so popular in downtown Miami, um, you know, you get a reckless driving charge, you get a DUI, or you get some type of, driving infraction. You'll come up with $5,000 to take care of that, right? You go to a ticket clinic, you'll go somewhere. You can, it's just it's that important for you to not have that type of infraction on your driving record. I could come up with a million other examples, right? Where if something is really that important to you, you have an anniversary or something, you can come up with $1,000 for something that's really pressing. And so when I have conversations with the founder, and if they have any hesitation about spending, $800 to $1,500 to make certain that a company, just fundamentally starts to get set up correctly, I tell them frankly, listen, you're just not that serious about your business, because you can come up with that.
Yeah, and so let's go to the next step. I've got an idea, maybe it's around this new AI stuff, and I'm at a bar and I'm talking to my friends. I'm saying, hey guys, why don't y'all kick in 50 grand? I call my mom up, say, Mom, can you kick in 50 grand? I go on my LinkedIn, hey, I'm raising money for my startup. If you want to come in, let me know. I'm raising $500,000. Do that, or am I going to get in trouble? And I know the answer,
Yeah.
but I'm sort of setting you up for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that comes as a surprise to a lot of first time founders, that anytime that you are selling equity or ownership interest in any type of business in exchange for some type of um, cash or some type of services, it is a securities transaction, i.e., it is something that state level and federal level securities regulations govern. Um, you see someone who has run afoul of, you know, the quote unquote the SEC, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and its governance and regulatory standards, it's likely something fundamentally that falls in that basket. So there are a whole suite of regulations that govern how you have to go about raising money from other people. And so in the example that Colin just gave, the second that you're there with your friends at the bar, and you're talking about, hey, I have an idea, give me some money, and I'll cut you in on this idea. I'll give you some ownership in it. Fundamentally, you're talking about a securities transaction, and you have to make certain that you're complying with applicable regulations. And as you can imagine, people run afoul of these regulations often. And again, for a first time entrepreneur, it can be very easy to run afoul of these regs. And you don't want to end up in a situation where someone is either suing you because you ran afoul of this, or they're reporting you to the SEC, and it makes a problem for you. Because if you end up with any type of SEC infraction, it can, not only result in some type of fine, or in, really heinous cases, jail time, but it can also restrict your ability to raise money from people in the future. And so you want to be cognizant of these things. And to Michelle's, point, these are things that, a securities lawyer, um, is familiar with. It's not something that typically, your traffic ticket lawyer, someone who's not a practitioner in the space, would likely be thinking about. So it is important to talk to the right people.
I'm trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to get started here. As startups, we just don't have a lot of budget, and I think Michelle made that clear.
Hmm.
So, early on, are you able to do some type of structure? I know SAFE, we talk about SAFE
Hmm.
investments where it's a loan, and discount to purchase equities on a further round.
Hmm.
Is that something that you can do with, and I remember this is like a gray line here, but is that something you can do without filing for a Reg D or a Reg A plus or Reg CF? And we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But I was just curious: is that a more
So,
inexpensive way of doing it?
so from a documentation perspective, people like to rely on SAFEs, so simple agreement for future equity, to raise money. But it's still the same regulatory paradigm. So, at the point where you're issuing a safe in your company, it's still a securities transaction. And so the question is, how are you going about complying with the applicable regs? Now, in large part, when you're raising money, um, for instance, that whatever type of transaction expenses you have are typically handled based on who the investors are. So let's say that you have a really, hot and trending tech company that, is getting a lot of attention, and people want to invest in it, to the extent that you're getting some very sophisticated investors and sophisticated VCs involved. So at the point where you're getting, sort of, you know, sophisticated sort of Silicon Valley or institutional type investors looking at it, what they would expect to bake all of your transaction costs, your lawyers, your accountants, whoever else, they would expect to bake those type of costs into the transaction itself. If you're dealing with friends and family, not so much the case. But you know, to take a step back, yes, it's still a securities transaction, and typically what would happen, like at our law firm, people will sit down, like I sit down and have conversations with people all the time where I'll sort of walk them through the mechanics of an offering and the mechanics of what it is they're trying to accomplish. In a way like a traditional lawyer would call it a consultation. So something where they're not getting charged for it, right? You sit down and sort of talk about, listen, this is what you're trying to do, and this is how you typically would go about, um, achieving it. A lot of times, law firms will have creative ways of working with startups. So sometimes law firms will defer fees for a certain amount of time. Um, Oftentimes there will be some type of trigger, like, law firm fees will be deferred for the earlier of 6 months, or the company raises $200,000, or sometimes like that, right? So I think the message that I would relay or convey is have the conversation with somebody first, right? And get sort of a lay of the land of what your options are in terms of getting good advice. Because again, it's a lot. You can end up in some really bad situations if you don't get um, good advice on it. And again, the encouraging thing is that venture capital is not new, and the people who are the professional service providers like me who are practicing in the space are used to doing it. So it's a common conversation that we have with, a founder who's really concerned about their budget and really concerned about their timelines and, their legal spend.
Yeah, I think the method that I've enjoyed the most over the last 25 years has been raising money from sophisticated investors under Regulation D. We did a private placement memorandum for Club years ago, and we actually raised $12 million. We did the private placement memorandum. It was interesting because it was a document that really articulated our business plan, but
Hmm.
also had a list of risk factors associated with it. And then we ended up filing with multiple states, our Reg D with multiple states, because we had multiple investors from multiple states, and it worked pretty well. We were
Hmm.
able to raise the money just using my LinkedIn contacts, which I thought was interesting. And can you talk a little bit about Reg D, Reg CF, Reg A plus, and just sort of break down those three areas? Unless I'm missing one. Am I missing one there? I don't know.
Yeah. So I think so from a lawyer's perspective, the way that we think about the regulatory paradigm of raising money is actually pretty simple. So anytime there's a transaction where you're raising money into your company, one of two things is happening. Either the transaction and the securities being issued are registered, or they are exempt from registration for some reason. So when you see a company doing an IPO, right? A private company is now going public. They're doing an IPO. That is a registered transaction. The securities are being registered so that you can buy and sell them publicly, like as an investor. Most of the transactions that are taking place for a startup company are going to be transactions that are not registered, but they are exempt from registration. And so in each case, the question is, how is the transaction exempt from registration? So whenever you hear someone talking about, for instance, Reg D is uh, a set of rules under section 4A2 of the Securities Act. So the actual exemption is section 4A2, that essentially says, this issuer is issuing securities in a private way that does not require registration. And so, sort of the natural question that follows that is, well, how do I know that I'm, adequately satisfying this paradigm, that I'm actually selling privately in a way that's not going to require me to register? And the answer to that is, okay, well, you follow the rules that are set forth in, Rule 506 and Reg D, right? So when you're conducting an offering that's in compliance with Reg D, what you're doing is you're issuing securities in a fashion that is exempt from registration, and you're relying on the rules that are set forth in Reg D, which is basically a checklist, so that you're informing the SEC, yes, this company is selling securities, but it's selling securities in a way that's exempt from registration, and we know that it's exempt from registration because we're complying with the laundry list of rules that are set forth in under Reg D, and then there's subsets of ways to comply there. There are purely, private transactions. There are ways, where you're not doing any type of um, general solicitation to people you don't know. There are ways to do offerings under 506 Reg D where you are soliciting others. And then, similarly, when you get into crowdfunding or even, with Reg A plus, those are other, exemptions. Those are other, rules that provide certain exemptions from registration that allow you to sell sell securities to investors.
Now, I know Reg D is sort of limits it to sophisticated investors, but Reg A plus and Reg CF, you can now solicit to anyone. Is that correct?
Well, technically, you can utilize Reg D to sell to um, unaccredited investors, but they're just rules around it. There are limitations on how many unaccredited investors you can issue to, and there are also rules around um, what type of information you're required to give to these investors. And one of the biggest um, considerations anytime that you're selling securities in your company is, uh, you know, are you providing accurate information to your investors and sufficient information to your investors? Is the information that you're providing not false? Is it not misleading? Is it, are you omitting information that would otherwise present your information as being false or misleading? And those are the things that, all of these regulations are really trying to cure. In terms of offerings, the most common, in terms of exemptions that are relied upon, Reg D is, I think, by far the most common one because those are situations where you're selling to an identified group of investors that you have some type of relationship with. Um, when I see issuers want to focus on, for instance, Reg A plus, uh, that's a company where you have some people in the founder group who are familiar with the capital markets and familiar with running public companies and sort of want to find a way to fast track their way there. Um, Sort of the other end of the spectrum is sort of the crowdfunding space where you know the the issuer and founder may not have connections with any sophisticated investors and is sort of looking for a way to raise money without with a lack of sort of connections to VCs or sort of institutional investors.
And it's interesting. I know recently, about I think 2 years ago, roughly, or maybe it was three, they opened up Reg CF so you could raise up to $5 million under the Reg CF. And again, with Reg CF, it's a lot easier than Reg A plus and a lot less expensive, I presume. Is that the advantage?
I think I think it's sort of your mileage may vary type of situation. For issuers who have used Reg A plus, uh, I think they can do it as efficiently. I wouldn't say it's less efficient to do a Reg A plus than um, a Reg CF, and maybe Reg CF is a little bit more user friendly. From a lawyer's perspective, we just see a lot less. Typically, if someone is getting us involved, it's probably going to be a more traditional exempt offering under Reg D, and then you'll see again sort of people are a little bit more familiar with the capital market space. Then we start to see sort of Reg A plus, and then much much less frequently is when we see the CF.
And I should add for those listeners here, because we're going in pretty deep in the weeds here. But there are platforms out there like Our Crowd and Start Engine who have a lot of these things semi worked out. They may not have everything worked out, but they've got a lot of these pieces worked out. And I'm certain, John, if someone were to come to you, they don't need to know they need this or that. They just want to know they
Hmm.
want to raise $5 million, right? So,
That's right.
right.
That's
So
right.
then you would just try to analyze their situation and figure out, okay, in my recommendation would be do the following based on
That
what you're telling me.
that's correct. And oftentimes at the point where I'm having the conversation with a founder, they have likely had conversations with potential investors, right? Like either you've had the conversation with potential investors and the investors are trying to push you into doing a particular type of offering or structure the deal a certain way, or you haven't, you've attempted to have conversations with investors and haven't had any or haven't had much success with it, and sort of have questions there. But typically, there's been some type of conversation, or the founder has an inkling of an idea about how he or she wants to raise money, and it can there are a lot of variables. How much money are they trying to raise? What stage is the business in? How has the business been funded thus far? Have they has the founder been bootstrapping the business, or is the business mature enough that it's actually, it has operations, and the operations have enough revenues to support, you know, its functions. So that's exactly what we do, Colin. Someone will come in and they'll describe the business, describe where the business is, describe why they want to raise money, how much they want to raise, what's it for, and we sit down and think through what the most effective way to achieve it is. But I would say, um, it's a strong percentage. I don't know that I can put a number on it, but it is not uncommon for a founder to show up in a conversation with me, like with some type of term sheet in hand, because an investor or investors are sort of interested and have been prodding them in one direction or another.
That's great. And if you're in the audience and you have a question for John, oh my gosh, we are so lucky to have you on the stage here, John, and sharing all this wealth of information. And it's free to ask. You can just raise your hand and come join us on stage and ask the question. Or you're thinking about raising money and you have a particular scenario, and we can, John could answer, or I could answer, or Michelle, around based on our experiences as to what you might consider or what structure might be beneficial for you. So again, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going here,
Well,
right,
I
Michelle?
have a
So you want to
question.
go? You go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, yeah. So, I'm going to take it from the other side, John. So, a lot of us, that participate, a lot of the members here on Startup Club, they might work for a
Hmm.
startup, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It may be a situation where they're like loving the company and they have an opportunity to invest. Hopefully, it's an opportunity where they're getting options,
Hmm.
and we're all hanging out. We're a tight knit group, and the boss says, "Hey, you're working really hard, and I know I'm not paying you market rate. I'm going to give you 10% of the company." All
Hmm.
right, and all this happened over a beer, and nothing happens. Like, oh my gosh, like what should happen? Like what should happen in that scenario where we're working for the startup, we're either investing and we've been promised actual shares, or we have options. Like what should we be looking for to protect our own interests?
Hmm. So one of it's a very good question, and the implications are actually a lot broader than just that uh, just that example. So, and again, I don't know if I said when we started, but I'm a lawyer. Um, you can't take anything that I'm saying as sort of specific legal advice. It's sort of general legal advice. So in any case, if you're faced with this, make certain you actually talk to a lawyer who can look at your specific facts. But generally speaking, right, for in this type of situation, you always want to have whatever the understanding is committed to some type of agreement, to have it committed in writing. At the very least, to have it committed in an email or somewhere where there's a clear record of you know to form a contract. There has to be a meeting of the minds and a clear meeting of the minds. And so again, I say it's broader than just the example that Michelle presents because it can happen in that scenario where you're talking about a founder onboarding employees and sort of saying, hey, listen, I really, you're a great coder, you're a great, you would be a great resource for this team. I want to bring you on board and I want to give you 2% of the company, et cetera, et cetera. And if I'm the employee in that situation, I'm immediately saying, okay, I need to see an offer letter. I need to see documents. I need to see something that um, see an award agreement that clearly lays this out, right? But that's the case in any type of contracting situation, right? Like if you were buying the securities, it would be the same thing. If you want to have just if it was just a conversation about your employment agreement itself, if it had nothing to do with equity, right? If it was just I'm going to be a software engineer on your team, and the arrangement is going to last for 6 months, and you're going to pay me X amount per month, then committing it to an actual agreement is in writing is something that you want to do. And as we've all experienced, sometimes that can lag with with an emerging company, with a startup, because the founder has 50 million things that the founder is trying to do on a daily basis, oftentimes without having back office or HR or assistants to sort of help document things. But if you're the employee in that situation, potential employee in that situation, you just have to be very stubborn and dogmatic about um, seeing it in writing, because again, from a lawyer's perspective, if it's not in writing, then it's not real to me. And so, you know, yes, you can, in a lot of states, in a lot of places, you could potentially have a verbal agreement, et cetera, et cetera. But, good luck going to court and how much time and money you would spend trying to sue somebody to prove something that hasn't been committed in writing.
Yeah, and I also believe that ambiguity is our enemy.
Hmm.
As startup founders, we really want to motivate our employees and those around us. And if we don't put it in writing, we don't do it correctly, they're just not going to believe it exists. You can say, I'll give
Hmm.
you 5% of a company, but if you actually put it in writing, you stick it on card, and people can actually see their shares, it makes a huge amount of difference. Well, we do want to
Hmm.
jump over to Carol. Carol, thank you for being brave and coming on stage. Do you have a question, a thought about this topic, or just what would you like to talk about today?
Thanks for having me up. And yes, it does require bravery for me to get on stage and speak, but my questions won't be answered unless I open my mouth.
We
So,
love it. We love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are no such things as bad questions.
Well, what you were saying, I listened to. I think I came in at the beginning, and I have bad ADHD, really bad. And at a certain point, it was like my brain's just fried. If I was in class, I'd be sleeping. I was about to navigate away, but I'm like, this is really good information that I need. I definitely need it. I spend a lot of time in the business credit groups and real estate groups, and I'm trying to formulate my business now. Um, I have two different businesses. I have the job that I do, that is a great potential business, and then I have my real interest, which is real estate. And in the real estate, I recognize that I need to do something like syndication, which is for the what I want to do, which is above my pay grade, and I don't know how or where to get started. And so I heard you speaking about the different series to, under what works and what doesn't. That's where I started becoming a little bit lost in the sauce. Um, so I guess my question to both you and Colin would be, at what point do you, at what point and under what circumstance do you consult an attorney like either of you to say, I need help starting my business to create it such that when it gets to that point, if it does, that it's saleable or investable?
From my perspective, on day one. The sooner the better, because if you're having a conversation with an attorney who is used to working in the space, is used to working with startups, and used to working with venture capital or preparing companies to go public or preparing companies to be sold, they can pretty quickly tell you. Like I have conversations with people all the time where I say, listen, okay, I understand where your business is. You may not be, the business may not be at the point where you're actively engaging counsel to help with certain things. I have that conversation with people all the time where I say, listen, these are the things you want to sort of focus on in terms of forming your company, and we could potentially help with that. And these are some other things to think about. But once the company has grown a little bit, or you've hit certain milestones, and let's revisit and have the conversation again. I think a lot of times when people think about talking to lawyers or even to accountants or bankers or other service providers, they're thinking about it being, sort of ongoing advice, um, ongoing bills, sort of ongoing, and that's typically not the case. Like legal advice can be very bespoke to your situation and to very specific tasks, right?
Mhm.
It can be as simple as, okay, at this point right now, you're just simply trying to set up your company, to set, is it, you're going to set up an LLC, you're going to set up a corporation, like you're just trying to set it up.
So I'm
This is how you
actually
would
in.
have to go about it.
Yeah, I'm actually in certain groups right now where that's, and it's all over, social media, Clubhouse, Instagram, a lot of providers, service providers showing how to build business credit and how to set yourself up. But again, I realize that that's credit, which is a loan and not an investment. But at the
Hmm.
same time, you're formulating your business such that it is set up, formulated right in terms of the foundation. But how
Hmm.
do we know that just because these are a list of steps to do, that they are in compliance with someone like yourself who is going to look at your business probably a year or two or 5 years down the road and said, well, you thought you did everything right, but for what we're trying to do now, it's not good.
Hmm. Well, I'll say this. The good part is, um, the good part is that the better the business is, and the better the prospects of the business and upside of the business, the more leeway you get with potential investors, potential business partners. It's sort of like I don't know if you follow sports at all, but like for a sports analogy, um, if you're LeBron James, you don't have to practice the same way that everybody else does, right? Like, somebody's going to look at it and they're going to want you to be on their team, sort of regardless. And I mention that to say that there are very few items from, for instance, like a corporate documentation perspective that can really be fatal to a company. Typically there are things that can be fixed if they aren't done correctly.
Mm.
And if an investor is genuinely interested in your company and genuinely interested, and mind you, when you're talking about a startup, you're talking about investors who are really sort of like partners, right? Because they are not going to profit from your business immediately. Like it's in their best interest to help you grow the business. And so, typically an investor who's really a good partner is going to help you identify the problems that you have in your corporate documents or whatever it may be, and, help you address those issues, right? Um, Again, certain problems are bigger than others. Like if you have a person who is out there sort of fraudulently raising money or something, then an investor's not going to want to cure that or want to be like they're going to run the other way.
Mm.
But if it's you're missing some signatures on um, some commercial agreements or something like that, like those are things that they would try to help you work through, and that's why I say it's better to have a conversation. The sooner you have conversation with lawyers, the less redoing of things and less fixing of things that were done incorrectly you have to do, which means, less money and less wasted time when you have somebody that's interested. Because I can tell you from experience, like you could work, you could work on building your business. It could be a year, it could be 10 years, like, just amount of time you put into it. And the second you have an investor that's willing to put several $1 million into your business, you are going to want that money into your business yesterday.
Mm.
And now like the I's that didn't get dotted and the T's that didn't get crossed 3 years ago are now, things that you were sort of putting on the back burner. I know I need to do this. I know when I talked to a lawyer, they said I need to do this. And then money appears and everything is, now a rush to get it done. Right. And so that's why I say just the sooner the better. And, when you're dealing with good and ethical lawyers, like they're not going to sit there and try to take, money from you, for no reason. Right. Like they're going to say, listen, this is the best way to go about setting up a company. And, you know, if you need to come back in 6 months or a year, then we can do that. When you talk about, and I want to be clear because one of the things you mentioned was, for instance, like potential lines of credit and things like that. Like there's like primarily what we're talking about here are, instances where you are going out to investors to raise money. Yes, there are other ways to finance a business, um, for purposes of operations. There are government loans and assistance programs. There are, traditional bank loans, going to, you go to a bank and ask for a business loan. Those are things that businesses have used historically. Um, that's a little bit outside of what this conversation is, and
Right.
in those cases, that's when it's really a conversation from a from a business plan perspective, and um, you know having some type of business consultant or financial advisor, sort of sitting down when you're making your business plan, thinking about the best ways to raise money for the business. And so at the point where someone's talking to me about these things, they've already made the decision that, the method that they want to deploy to raise money is we want to, you know, go out to investors to give
Right.
them some type of equity in the company.
And that's why I said the difference between what I do for work now is employment, is my employment. It's my own business, but it's my job.
Hmm.
And the other thing being real estate, I'm here in Southwest Michigan, so it's very kind of small town, but it's a resort area. And so there's a real estate project that I've got my eyes on and have spoken with the city about, but I just seen something similar got completed, and that was like 26 million. Um, and I'm looking to do something like that. Of course, I don't want to be on the hook for 26 million business loan, or it's not even a thing. But
Right. Right.
I wouldn't. And I've spoken with the city. They're looking for people to come and say, "Okay, here's my proposal." Well, I think I'd even look stupid going there to say, "Here's my proposal," if I can't back that up.
Right. Right.
But if I knew the nuances about raising capital, like what we're talking about here, then I would feel more secure that I'm not only do I have a great idea, but I know the resources to get it executed.
Right. And and in a project like that, what we've been sort of talking about, or what I think, like in the tech space, for instance, you're talking about raising money into a business, and that business is the operating business that's actually going to use that money. In real estate, for instance, the project you're talking about, that may be something that's more akin to, um, you might be a fund manager. Like, you may be raising money from other people for the purposes of investing in something else and developing it. And so, in your case, it's definitely a situation where you would want to, um, really, in part, it goes hand in hand. Like, you start working on a business plan and sort of thinking about what you want to do in terms of, um, what's the ultimate goal? What's the actual business that I'm running here? Like, is it, just the acquisition of this property? Is it the development of this property? Is it all of the above? Sort of what am I trying to accomplish? And then, sit down with a lawyer that's going to help you map
Okay.
that out. And I don't think there are any two ways around it that way. Like, your inclination is absolutely right. Like, you have to sit down with a lawyer that's going to help you
Okay.
structure it and think about how you could go about raising money to do it.
Yeah, and I think you brought
So,
up a good point there, Carol, that this whole idea about signing yourself up. If you go out and do an SBA right now, you're going to personally sign in your home, your assets. Right now, I just looked on the internet. It's 9.75 to 10.25% on a government-backed SBA loan where you're personally putting up collateral. Yeah, we're talking about, John, we're talking about when we do these investments, you don't personally sign on them. You're not guaranteeing the investment. And the second thing, though, I would add, and we never really touched upon liquidation preference, but that's something to consider as well when you're doing these types of raises. I do want to get to Mr. Metaphysical. I can't get your actual
thanks,
name,
John and
but
Colin.
I do want to get to you next and have some time. But thank you, Carol, for that line of questioning, and hopefully John was able to give you some feedback. And
Thank you
we only
all.
have about 7 or 8 minutes left, so Mr. Metaphysical,
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you all for doing this room as well. Can you all hear me?
we hear
I
you loud and
can.
clear.
Okay. Um, I do got to say, Mr. Metaphysical, not to be confused with Meta for Facebook, whatever. But uh, yeah, I changed my name on here. So, well, my nickname on this platform is Meta, so that's why you see it on the profile. But basically, um, I have I have a gentleman. I was hiring for attorneys on LinkedIn um, sometime last year, and one of them stepped up and said that he's not really represented me, but he says that he's connected to a lot of overseas investors and a wealthy network, and that I shouldn't worry about any amount of money. That he's constantly saying he's working things out, things of that sort. My concern is money laundering. I've also worked as an insurance agent in the past, and so is there any way to protect against money? Is there any, first of all, are there any laws that could cause my business to just lose the complete business due to like criminal happenings overseas that I'm not aware of? And then is there any way to protect against that?
Yeah, I think, primarily you have to know who your investors are. And, the short answer to your question is yes. Like there are rules around the steps you need to take to verify who it is investing in your business. Um, so that's, from a securities law perspective, that's the case, but also just from a general, you know, just from a general, like Patriot Act and, just, you know, U.S. money laundering laws, right? Um, so, that's something that you have to protect against. It isn't clear, um, you know, oftentimes when people are raising money, uh, you may want to use like a licensed or registered broker who has a specific process for doing it. I mean, it's not uncommon for, um, I have to be careful what I say here because like, I think you have to have a clear
Okay.
understanding. You have to have a clear understanding with, if this is, first of all, if you've not entered into, an engagement letter with this lawyer with respect to what services the person is providing and what services you're paying for. Sort of back to the conversation with Michelle earlier about sitting at the bar and people sort of coming up with numbers. That's the space you're in, right? Like there needs to be a clear understanding about who's doing what and why and how and for how much. But again, not to give, I can't give you specific legal guidance on that question. You'd have to, engage me too. but
Okay.
It
Okay. No,
sounds
but
definitely.
like
but
it
but
sounds pretty
but
complicated there. Yeah.
but I
Definitely.
think I think one of the things I tell clients pretty often is if something doesn't feel right to you, it doesn't feel right for a reason, right? And so you want anytime you're engaging with anyone, it could be a lawyer, it could be an accountant, it could be whatever, a commercial party to your business. You want to have it in writing exactly what it is going on and what you're paying for, and again, like you are responsible for knowing who your investors are in your business. So and there are ways to establish protocols and checks and balances for vetting who it is that's investing into your business.
Okay.
Yeah. So, John, I've got to jump off in 3 minutes. It's interesting because the meeting that I'm having is the very first meeting of the directors for a charity called Help for Ukraine Club, and we applied for a 501c about 8 months ago. And it's a charity that's directed at a city in Ukraine called Mykolaiv, where we have our programmers and our office staff who work out of that city. And just curious, like we're going to try to raise money, obviously, for the charity. And are there any rules around not-for-profits? And do we have to file SEC documents or any of that kind of stuff for a not-for-profit?
Yeah, not nonprofits have their own completely, you know, I mean, it's related because again, it's still a securities transaction fundamentally. But there are specific rules that govern qualifying as, for lack of a better term, a nonprofit that definitely need to be complied with. And admittedly, I am not an expert in that space. Believe it or not, there are lawyers who that's all they do every day, all day
I
is
know
is
we have a lawyer
compliance with.
who's dedicated to that. But I thought I would just throw
Yeah,
that question out there,
yeah.
thinking, could we be making a mistake? Because I think once we've got our 501c approval and we go on the platforms, I believe we're okay to solicit. But I just thought you might have an information. But on that note, but
Yeah, it's
I
still, yeah, it's still
it's different.
securities transactions. It's still, it's still securities transactions. That you need to make certain that the state and federal regs are being complied with when you're raising money into it.
Well, John, I have to say that This last hour, you've shared a wealth of information. And if you came in late in the show, you definitely want to listen to the replay, or you can check it out on your favorite podcast network. It's under Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. Every week we try to put together a speaker or a discussion, a topic, and figure out what it is that serial entrepreneurs do over and over again to succeed. And one of the things that successful businesses do is they raise money, and they raise money the right way. And
Hmm.
having somebody like John at your back can make a big difference. If somebody does want to reach out to you, John, what would be the best way?
Either LinkedIn, you can find me, or they can just email me directly at owensjohn@gtlaw.com.
Well, I truly am thankful, and I'm looking forward to you working with you on more cohorts at the NSU, the Allen Levan Center. And what a great
Absolutely.
topic. And I think we all benefited today, and you've really helped out the startup community. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for having me. I hope that everyone got something out of our conversation today.
No, thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Absolutely. And we'll look forward to having you back again. So, everyone, all the members, thank you for attending today and your very thoughtful questions. Be sure to go to the website, www.startup.club, sign up for the email list, and also our gift to you, feel free to peruse our over 200 blog posts, recorded sessions, and also find Serial Entrepreneur on your favorite podcast network. So thanks, and everyone have an amazing weekend.
Thank you.